That day, I had just returned from school, feeling utterly drained. It had been a long day, filled with hours of lessons, and the joy of running around and laughing with my friends during recess. My mind was tired from the schoolwork, and my body ached slightly from the constant movement. But there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the day was finally over. As I stepped through the front door, the familiar scent of home greeted me. My mother was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, and the soft sounds of evening filled the house. After washing up, I sat down to a simple but comforting meal. The warmth of the food and the peace of being home surrounded me, easing the lingering fatigue of the day. When dinner was over, I made my way to my room, as I always did, hoping to relax and escape into my own little world for the night. I shared the house with my family, of course, but recently, my Uncle Ben had come to stay with us for a while. He was my dad's younger brother, and everyone in the family affectionately called him Uncle Ben. He was always a bit of a wanderer, moving from place to place, so when he arrived, it added a slight change to our usual routine. That night, after the whirlwind of the day had settled, I went straight to my room. The familiar comfort of my bed was exactly what I needed. I changed into my soft, cozy pajamas, the fabric comforting my skin as I slipped under the warm, inviting blankets. There was something about the way the covers wrapped around me that made the day's exhaustion melt away. The stillness of the night was a perfect contrast to the busyness of the day. As I lay there in the quiet, I felt a gentle breeze drift through the window. The air was cool but not cold, and it brought with it the peaceful sounds of the night. The house was perfectly still, the silence so profound that I could hear the faint sound of crickets chirping outside, their rhythmic song lulling me into a deeper sense of calm. In the distance, I heard the bark of a dog, one sharp sound, followed by the quiet emptiness of the night. I closed my eyes, feeling utterly safe and comfortable in my little cocoon of warmth and silence. My mind drifted lazily, wandering to the memories of the day. I couldn't help but smile as I thought about the laughter shared with my friends and the stories that filled the air during our games. It had been such a happy day, and the memories were like little rays of sunshine in my mind. I felt peaceful, content, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to daydream about what tomorrow might bring. Perhaps we would go to the park, or my mom would make my favorite breakfast of pancakes with syrup, a simple pleasure, but one that always made me feel special. As these comforting thoughts danced through my mind, I felt my body relax further. My thoughts slowed, like whispers fading into the distance, and soon, I felt like I was floating. There was a feeling of weightlessness, as though I was drifting through the air, sinking deeper and deeper into a restful sleep. The world outside my room seemed to disappear, and I was lost in the quiet beauty of my dreams. But then, in the stillness of the night, something interrupted the peaceful quiet. I heard a faint sound, almost like someone walking softly. First, I thought I was imagining things, half dreaming. I stayed still, not wanting to disturb the comforting cocoon of sleep I was about to fall into. But the sound persisted, growing closer. Step by step, my heart gave a small, uneasy jump. I wasn't sure if I was awake or still caught between the dream world and reality. I opened my eyes just slightly, careful not to let my movement betray that I was no longer asleep. In the dim light that filtered in from the hallway, I saw a shadowy figure standing in my room. It was so faint at first that I could hardly believe my eyes, but as I focused, I recognized who it was. It was Uncle Ben. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a wave of confusion wash over me. Why was he standing there, in the middle of the night, in my room? I blinked, trying to shake off the sleepiness, wondering if this was just a dream. But no, he was real there, right in front of me. I lay perfectly still, hoping that if I pretended to be asleep, he would leave, thinking I didn't notice him. But he didn't move. Uncle Ben just stood there, staring at me silently, his face hard to read in the dim light. His presence was unsettling, and I could feel the confusion building inside me. Why wasn't he saying anything? Why was he watching me like that? A mix of emotions rushed through me: sleepy disbelief, surprise, and a creeping sense of unease. My body tensed, and I felt a strange knot form in my chest. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't place it. As I lay there, paralyzed by uncertainty, I hoped, prayed even, that he would simply turn around and leave. But instead, to my horror, I felt him take a step closer to my bed. My heart started to race, pounding so hard in my chest that I feared it might echo in the room. I wanted to speak, to ask him what he was doing, but my voice failed me. It was as if it had been frozen in my throat. The heavy, uncomfortable feeling in my chest grew stronger, and I couldn't breathe properly. My mind told me that Uncle Ben was family, that there was no reason to be afraid. Maybe he was just checking on me, making sure I was okay, or doing something kind because he cared. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. After what felt like an eternity, Uncle Ben finally turned and walked out of the room, leaving me there. In the silence of my own thoughts, I stayed in bed, staring into the darkness, unsure of what had just happened. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all, but nothing seemed to fit. Was he just checking on me? Or was there something else? The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling in my stomach, as though the events of the night had left a shadow over my thoughts. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing, that Uncle Ben was probably just checking on me as an older brother might. But as I got dressed and went downstairs for breakfast, I couldn't help but feel a lingering unease. The memory of the night before, the shadowy figure standing in my room, the quiet tension, it all seemed too vivid to ignore. I didn't know if I should mention it to anyone, or if I should simply let it go. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. First, I wasn't sure if it was something worth mentioning, something I should bring up or talk about. But then, as time went on, I started second-guessing myself. Maybe it wasn't as significant as I initially thought. Maybe I was just overthinking it, turning something small into something far bigger than it really was. I watched Uncle Ben as he interacted with everyone around the house. He was chatting and laughing just like he always did, as though everything was completely normal. He was in his usual form, smiling, helping with chores, and making jokes. No one else seemed to notice anything strange. Nobody looked at him with any suspicion or concern. Everyone just went about their business as if everything were perfectly fine. The more I watched him, the more I started questioning whether my own feelings were even valid. Was I just imagining things? Was I overreacting? I started to wonder if what I felt was something real, or simply a product of my overactive mind. But no matter how hard I tried to push it aside, I couldn't shake off that strange, unsettling feeling from the night before. Every time I looked at Uncle Ben, I couldn't stop recalling the image of him standing beside my bed, silent and still. In the darkness, that thought alone was enough to make my stomach churn. I decided, for my own peace of mind, to keep my distance from him as much as possible. If I could just avoid being near him, maybe I could feel safe again. Maybe the fear would pass. But that night, I stayed up later than usual. I tried to shake off my anxiety, telling myself that everything was fine, that the events of the previous night were a one-time occurrence, and that I shouldn't be so worried. Still, despite my attempts to convince myself otherwise, I couldn't completely quell the nerves gnawing at me. My thoughts wandered: school, friends, the things I loved to do, the little joys that usually brought me comfort. I tried to focus on them as I lay there in the dark, my body growing tired and heavy with the pull of sleep. Just as I began to drift off, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My heart skipped a beat, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I knew it was him. I could hear the soft shuffle of his shoes against the floor, the faint creak of the floorboards as he approached. This time, unlike before, Uncle Ben didn't stop at the doorway. I felt the shift in the air as he moved closer. My breath caught in my throat, and I held still, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things, that it was all just a figment of my overactive mind. But then, to my horror, I felt his hand on my shoulder. It was a light, almost gentle touch, but it was enough to make my heart race with fear. I kept my eyes shut tightly, pretending to be asleep, hoping beyond hope that he would just leave. But he didn't. He stood there, unmoving, and I could feel his presence lingering, too close for comfort, My mind raced with questions that I couldn't answer. Why was he doing this? What did he want? What was going on? I didn't understand any of it, but I knew deep down that something wasn't right. I was trapped in a strange, uncomfortable space, too scared to move, too scared to ask, too scared to do anything but lie there, still as I could, hoping he would go away. After what felt like an eternity, Uncle Ben quietly withdrew from the room, the soft sound of his footsteps fading as he left. I lay there, frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest. The feeling of dread clung to me, and I couldn't shake it. I didn't understand what was happening, but one thing was painfully clear. It wasn't right. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something was terribly wrong. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy weight pressing on my chest. I tried to shake it off, but the anxiety still lingered, like a shadow that refused to leave. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, about what had been happening. I wanted to find some way to make sense of it, to get rid of this fear that seemed to follow me everywhere. But how could I explain something that didn't even make sense to me? I thought about talking to my mom, but doubts crept in. What if she didn't believe me? What if she got angry? Or worse, what if she thought I was just imagining things? I decided to keep it to myself, hoping that maybe, just maybe, Uncle Ben would stop coming into my room. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern continued. Each night, I felt more and more anxious about going to sleep. I started staying up later, reading or listening to music, anything to delay the inevitable. But eventually, the exhaustion would catch up with me, and I would drift off, only to be woken up by the sound of footsteps. The sensation of Uncle Ben's presence became a daily nightmare, growing worse with each passing day. Sometimes, he would simply stand by the door, watching me in silence. Other times, he would sit on the edge of my bed, his eyes fixed on me as if I were some sort of specimen under a microscope. I didn't know why he was doing this, but each time it happened, I felt more helpless and more alone. I wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but the fear always choked me into silence. The room, once my sanctuary, now felt like a prison, a place I couldn't escape from, no matter how hard I tried. I tried to act normal around Uncle Ben during the day, but it was impossible. Every time he smiled at me or tried to strike up a conversation, I could feel the discomfort in my chest. It wasn't that I didn't want to interact with him. It was that something inside me was telling me to stay away. My family didn't notice anything wrong. They saw him as my dad's younger brother, just another person helping out around the house. To them, there was nothing out of the ordinary. But for me, the tension was growing with every passing day. Every interaction, every moment spent in his presence, made me feel more and more uneasy. I couldn't explain it, and I couldn't make anyone understand. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. I just didn't know how to stop it. I had changed. The Uncle Ben I once knew, the one full of laughter and jokes, the one I could always count on for a good time, was no longer the same. The man who had once brought joy to my life had transformed into someone I feared. The warmth I once felt around him had evaporated, replaced by a cold sense of dread that lingered every time he was near. He wasn't the playful, fun uncle anymore now. He was a shadow, a presence I couldn't escape, and one I desperately didn't want to be around. The change had happened gradually, and I hadn't been able to pinpoint exactly when it all started. But as the days went on, it became undeniable. His behavior made me uncomfortable, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. His actions, his words, there was an unspoken tension in the air whenever he was around, and I couldn't make sense of it, couldn't understand why he was behaving the way he was. All I knew was that it felt wrong. One evening, as the quiet of the house settled around me, I realized that I couldn't keep this bottled up inside any longer. The weight of it was too heavy. I had to tell someone, but who could I turn to? I thought about confiding in Sarah, my friend from school, someone who had always listened when I needed to vent about my problems. But this felt different. This wasn't something I could just share with anyone. It felt too serious, too terrifying. I didn't want to burden her with something so dark and unsettling. So, I kept it to myself, feeling more and more isolated. That night, I stayed awake for hours, hoping against hope that Uncle Ben wouldn't come into my room again. I lay there, frozen, staring up at the ceiling, listening for any sign that he was near. My heart raced every time I heard a floorboard creak or the faintest sound in the hallway. The fear gnawed at me, but there was nothing I could do but wait. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. But it wasn't long before I was jolted awake in the dead of night. There he was again. I felt him before I even opened my eyes. His presence in the room was like a dark cloud that seemed to fill the space, suffocating me with fear. This time, he didn't just stand there silently. He reached out and touched me, his voice breaking the silence, asking if he could share the bed with me. My mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. I was caught off guard, and in that moment, I could feel my stomach tighten with discomfort. I shook my head, a quiet, nervous no escaping my lips, hoping that would be enough to stop him. But it wasn't. He didn't stop. Instead, he pressed further, his voice taking on a strange tone as he asked if I was just not in the mood. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I instinctively knew something was wrong. Before I could react, his hand was on my shoulder, his body leaning in close as if to kiss me. A wave of panic surged through me, and my whole body tensed. My stomach twisted into knots, and all I wanted was to get away from him. I pulled back as best as I could, turning my face away, pushing against him with all the strength I had. His breath was warm on my skin, and I felt trapped, but I didn't give in. I resisted with everything I had, pushing him back, trying to put distance between us. It felt like an eternity, but eventually, he stopped. There was a brief moment of silence. Then a look of disappointment crossed his face. Without another word, he turned and left the room, disappearing into the shadows of the house. The door clicked shut behind him, and I lay there, trembling, my mind racing. I felt a strange mixture of relief and confusion. I was glad he was gone, but I didn't know how to process what had just happened. I felt violated, unsure of what to think or how to feel. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I had to tell someone. I needed help. I needed to stop pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. The next morning, I found my mom in the kitchen. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking as I tried to figure out how to start. I had to tell her. I couldn't keep this secret any longer. I had to make her understand. I took a deep breath and walked over to her, my voice trembling as I told her that I needed to talk to her about something important. The look on her face immediately changed. Concern washed over her features, and she put down the dish she was holding, focusing entirely on me. For a moment, I hesitated, the weight of what I was about to say pressing heavily on my chest. But I knew I had to speak up for my own safety. I couldn't let what had happened to me continue. Slowly, I explained what had been going on, how Uncle Ben had been coming into my room, how he would stand there, silent and menacing, and how each time he did, it made me feel more and more uncomfortable. I told her about that night, about the things he had said and done, and how scared I was. As I spoke, my mom listened carefully, her expression growing more serious with every word. Her face tightened, and I saw a flash of anger in her eyes. But she didn't interrupt. She let me finish, and when I was done, she pulled me into her arms, holding me tightly. "You did the right thing," she whispered, her voice shaky but full of conviction. "I'm so proud of you for telling me. I'll take care of everything. You're safe now." That evening, I overheard my parents talking. I couldn't hear everything, but I could tell my mom was upset. Her voice was louder than usual, and I could feel the tension in the air. I was relieved that I had told her, but a part of me was also scared of what might happen next, scared of the consequences. I felt like my world was turning upside down, and all I wanted was to go back to the way things were before, when everything felt safe and normal. The next morning, when I woke up, I noticed something was different. Uncle Ben was gone. He wasn't in the house, and when I asked my dad about it, he simply said that Uncle Ben had to leave. He wouldn't be staying with us anymore. He didn't offer any further explanation. and I didn't press him. Deep down, I knew the reason why. I had told my mom what had been happening, and now Uncle Ben was gone. I wasn't sure how to feel. A part of me was relieved, so relieved that I could finally feel safe again. But there was also a sense of sadness, of loss. He had been family, someone I had once trusted and looked up to. It was hard to believe that someone who had once been a source of joy in my life could have caused me so much pain and fear. And yet, there it was. The betrayal stung. Even as I tried to move forward, despite the sadness, I knew one thing for sure. I had done the right thing. I had found my voice, and I had used it. I had chosen to protect myself, and I had chosen to speak up. And for that, I would never regret it. It was a perplexing and overwhelming feeling, experiencing both relief and sadness simultaneously. I wasn't entirely sure how to process such a complex wave of emotions. But one thing was clear: things were safer now. I clung to that thought with the hope that, with time, the heavy weight of it all would slowly fade, and I could find a sense of peace again. The days drifted by, each one bringing a little more clarity, a little more stability. Gradually, I began to feel safer, more secure, and even started to rediscover the happiness I had once taken for granted. Gone were the nights spent worrying about someone entering my room, and in their place, a comforting sense of calm, allowing me to finally get a good night's rest. My parents were my rock during this difficult time. They made sure I felt comfortable and safe at every step. They reassured me over and over again that I had done the right thing by speaking up when I did. Their words gave me strength, and I started to realize how much their love and support truly meant. It was the kind of reassurance that helped heal wounds I hadn't even fully understood I had. I was also able to open up to my friends, something I hadn't thought I could do at first. I shared my story with them, explaining that sometimes, even people we trust can make us feel uncomfortable, and that it's vital to speak up when that happens. They listened attentively, offering their support, and in that moment, I felt empowered. It made me proud to know that I wasn't alone, that others were standing by me, and I realized how important it is to have a circle of people who not only listen but stand by you unconditionally. Looking back now, I can't help but feel a deep sense of pride in myself. I see how brave I was to confide in my mom, even though it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of courage. But in the end, I know it was the right thing to do. I've come to understand that no one, no matter their relationship to you, has the right to make you feel unsafe. That realization, while difficult, empowered me to trust myself more deeply. My feelings were valid, and it was okay to speak out when something wasn't right. Even if it felt uncomfortable or confusing, my family continued to support me in ways that I couldn't fully comprehend at the time. They wrapped me in a blanket of love and protection, offering reassurance that, no matter what, I was not alone. I learned through this experience the deep value of personal boundaries, how crucial it is to honor my own comfort and safety. I knew that my family would always stand by me, always be ready to listen, to protect me, and to remind me that I mattered. And in that realization, I found immense comfort. Their love was unshakable, and it became my anchor in those uncertain moments. But I didn't want to keep my experience to myself. I knew that if I could help even one person by sharing my story, it would be worth it. I began to speak up, to share my journey with other young people, to let them know that they should never feel afraid to speak out when something feels wrong. I wanted them to understand that their voices were powerful, that they had the right to protect themselves and set boundaries no matter who they were up against. By sharing my story, I hoped I could inspire others to find their own courage. As time passed, I began to feel more at peace with myself. The nightmares, which had once plagued my sleep, slowly faded away, and the fear that had once gripped my nights became a distant memory. I had taken back control of my life, and with that control came an unexpected strength. I was stronger because of what I had faced, and more importantly, because I had faced it head-on. Through all of this, my family and I became closer. We formed an even stronger bond, united by a shared sense of trust, love, and understanding. They never stopped reminding me that I was loved, that they would always be there to protect me, and that I could count on them no matter what. Knowing that they were there, always ready to listen and support me, made all the difference. It gave me the strength to keep moving forward, to heal, and to find my footing again. Looking back, I realized that courage comes in many forms, and speaking up that day was one of the bravest things I've ever done. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without fear, but it was necessary. In speaking out, I had protected myself and set a boundary that no one would ever cross. And in that simple yet profound act of courage, I found freedom, empowerment, and a deep, unshakable sense of peace.